I'm Special Agent Charlotte Brooks, 36 years old. I came up through the Bureau's counterintelligence ranks by doing the work no one wanted: long nights, cold coffee, and zero credit. For years, I supported my husband, Supervisory Special Agent Ethan Brooks, through every assignment and deployment, believing we were on the same side in work and in life. But when his call came during our family reunion, his voice cold and urgent, telling me to take our daughter and leave now, everything I thought I knew shattered. Have you ever been blindsided by someone you trusted completely? If you've had to rebuild yourself after that kind of shock, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being wronged, hit like and subscribe for more true stories about setting boundaries, loyalty, and survival. What happened next changed everything. I stood at the edge of my sister's backyard in Silver Spring, watching Sophie chase fireflies through the humid August evening. The smoky sweetness of barbecue hung in the air, mixing with my aunt's laughter and the steady hum of family voices I hadn't heard together in months. My cousin Jake was manning the grill, arguing with Uncle Martin about whether the Nationals had any chance this season. Aunt Lila sat in her lawn chair like a queen holding court, telling the same story about my father she'd told at every reunion since I was 12. It was the kind of scene that should have felt like home, the kind of moment that made you forget about encrypted files and surveillance protocols and the weight of a service weapon against your ribs. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Ethan hadn't been home in 3 weeks. Supervisory Special Agent Ethan Brooks, my husband of 9 years, currently embedded so deep in a cyber operations assignment that even his phone calls came through with digital delays and background static that shouldn't exist on a domestic line. It's just the encryption, he'd said the last time I questioned it. Standard protocol. But I'd worked counterintelligence long enough to know when someone was feeding me a line, even when that someone shared my bed and knew exactly how I took my coffee. My phone sat heavy in my pocket. I'd checked it twice in the last 10 minutes, and that wasn't like me. At Quantico, they'd trained us to trust our instincts before our intel, to recognize the shape of danger before it fully materialized. Right now, my instincts were screaming, but I couldn't identify the threat. "Charlie, you want another burger?" Jake called from the grill, using the nickname only family was allowed. "You're looking a little thin. They feeding you at the Bureau? Or are you living on coffee and classified documents?" "She's always working," Aunt Lila said, not unkindly. Just like her father. That man would have slept at the office if we'd let him. I smiled, gave them the expected response about trying to make it to more family events, about Sophie needing to know her cousins. But I was scanning the street beyond the fence, cataloging the parked cars, noting which ones I'd seen when I arrived and which were new. A silver Accord 3 houses down. A black SUV with tinted windows that was either Bureau-issued or wanted to look Bureau-issued. Neither had been there an hour ago. Sophie ran up to me, her hands cupped carefully around something. "Mommy, look." I caught one. I knelt down, peered into the small cave of her palms where a firefly pulsed with cold light. "That's beautiful, baby. But remember what we do with beautiful things." "Let them go," she said, already opening her hands. The firefly lifted into the darkening air, joining the dozens of others drifting across the yard like tiny rescue flares. My phone buzzed against my hip. I didn't recognize the number, but the area code was Northern Virginia. The same area code as Quantico, as Ethan's office, as half the intelligence community that surrounded DC like a ring of watchful eyes. I stood up, moved toward the back corner of the yard where the voices were quieter. "Brooks." "Charlotte." Ethan's voice, but different. Clipped. Missing the warmth that usually came through even on secure lines. "Who's there with you?" The question landed wrong. Not, "How's the reunion?" or "Is Sophie having fun?" Just that cold, tactical query that made the back of my neck prickle. "Everyone," I said, keeping my voice level. "Why?" The pause was too long. In the silence, I heard something that might have been him moving, might have been him checking sight lines or door locks or any of the 100 paranoid habits we'd both developed over years of hunting people who didn't want to be found. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "Listen to me. Take our daughter and walk away. Now." My heart kicked hard against my ribs. Ethan, don't argue. Don't explain. Take Sophie and walk to your vehicle. Drive to the secondary location. Do you remember where that is? The secondary location. We'd established it 3 years ago during a particularly nasty case involving a Russian intelligence officer who'd gotten too close to our home address. A safe house the Bureau maintained near Annapolis, a place with multiple exits and clear sight lines and neighbors who were either retired agents or didn't ask questions. I remember. Good. I'll make contact when it's secure. Charlotte, his voice cracked slightly on my name, the first real emotion breaking through. I'm sorry. The line went dead. I stood there for maybe 3 seconds, my training and my fear running parallel tracks through my mind. Every instinct said move, but I couldn't afford to panic. Panic made you visible, made you a target, turned a tactical retreat into a disaster. I walked back toward the picnic table, my stride measured and casual, smiling at something Aunt Lila was saying even though I couldn't hear her words over the rushing in my ears. Sophie was helping her cousin Maya collect firefly jars. I bent down, scooped her up like it was just affection and not extraction. Hey, sweet girl. Mommy needs to head out a little early. Say goodbye to everyone. But we just got here, she protested. I know, baby. But I got a call from work. You know how that is. She did know. She'd been knowing since she was old enough to understand that sometimes mommy and daddy's jobs meant leaving in the middle of dinner, meant packed bags by the door, meant conversations that stopped when she walked into rooms. She wrapped her arms around my neck, and I could feel her disappointment like a weight. I made the rounds quickly. Hugged Aunt Lila, promised Jake I'd make the next reunion, told my sister I'd call her tomorrow. All of it smooth and practiced, the kind of exit I'd made 100 times before. No one questioned it. No one ever did. We were halfway to the car when I heard it. The sharp electronic chirp of a car alarm, cutting through the evening noise. I turned, not too fast, just a concerned neighbor checking on a disturbance. The black SUV 3 houses down had its lights flashing. And standing next to it, looking directly at me, was a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, maybe 40, wearing clothes that were too casual to be bureau and too tactical to be civilian. His posture was wrong, too still, too focused. The way he was watching me wasn't curiosity. It was assessment. It was target acquisition. I didn't run. Running would confirm whatever he suspected. Instead, I buckled Sophie into her car seat with the same careful attention I always used, checked my mirrors with the same routine caution, pulled out of the driveway at exactly the speed limit. But my hands were shaking, and my daughter was asking why we had to leave, and in my rearview mirror, the man by the SUV had disappeared. Gone. Like he'd never been there at all. They met at Quantico during a joint training exercise that was supposed to be routine and ended up being anything but. I was 2 years into counterintelligence, already making a name for myself as someone who could read patterns in data that other analysts missed. Ethan was part of the cyber operations unit brought in to simulate a network breach, to teach us how foreign intelligence services were exploiting digital vulnerabilities we didn't even know existed. He was good at his job. Irritatingly good. The kind of good that made you want to either recruit him or punch him, depending on how your day was going. We ended up on opposite sides of a scenario involving a compromised embassy communication system. I'd identified what I thought was a mole in the diplomatic corps based on travel patterns and financial irregularities. He'd proven the same intel could be explained by a sophisticated remote access Trojan that didn't require human cooperation at all. We argued about it for 3 hours in a conference room at Quantico, neither of us willing to back down, until finally the supervising instructor called it a draw and told us both to write up our findings. We got coffee afterward. Not because either of us was particularly gracious about the stalemate, but because we were both too stubborn to let the other have the last word. That coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into a long drive back to DC where we talked about everything except work, about growing up in military families, about the particular loneliness of choosing a career that required you to lie to almost everyone you knew, about whether it was possible to have a normal life when your job was predicated on the assumption that everyone was potentially a threat. I don't think I want normal, I remember him saying. We were sitting in his car outside my apartment in Alexandria, watching the sun come up over the Potomac. I think I want someone who understands why I check the locks 3 times and sleep with my phone on the nightstand. That's a low bar, I'd said. You'd be surprised how few people meet it. He was right. In the years that followed, through a courthouse wedding and a quick honeymoon in the Shenandoah Valley and the birth of Sophie on a cold February morning, we built something that looked nothing like the marriages our civilian friends had. We didn't talk about our days. We couldn't. Operational security meant most of what we did stayed locked behind clearance levels and need-to-know restrictions. But we understood each other in ways that went deeper than conversation. We knew the weight of carrying secrets. We knew what it cost to be constantly alert, constantly analyzing, constantly preparing for threats that might never materialize but also might destroy everything you loved. We had systems. Protocols. The secondary location in Annapolis was one of dozens of contingencies we'd established over the years. We had go bags packed with cash and clean identification. We had code words for different levels of emergency. We had a shared understanding that if one of us ever called with that particular tone in their voice, the other would move first and ask questions later. The marriage wasn't perfect. How could it be? Ethan missed Sophie's 4th birthday because he was embedded with a task force in Seattle tracking a Chinese intelligence officer. I missed our anniversary 3 years running because I was running surveillance on a suspected mole in the State Department. We fought about it sometimes, in the careful way that people fight when they know their anger is reasonable but also futile. The job was the job. We'd both chosen it. We'd both chosen each other knowing exactly what that meant. But there had been changes lately. Small ones at first. Ethan coming home from the office with that look I recognized from my own mirror, the look of someone carrying information they couldn't share but couldn't quite contain. Phone calls taken in the garage or the backyard, conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. New passwords on his laptop. A wariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. I'd told myself it was operational stress. Cyber operations was brutal right now, with Russian and Chinese hackers getting bolder and the Bureau scrambling to plug holes faster than they appeared. Ethan was good, which meant he got assigned the hardest cases, which meant he carried the weight of protecting infrastructure that millions of Americans depended on without ever knowing it was at risk. But then there were the other signs. The way Agent Mariah Cole, his usual partner, wouldn't quite meet my eyes at the office holiday party last December. The fact that his immediate supervisor, a GS-15 named Patterson, had stopped returning my emails about a joint training proposal. The morning I'd found him standing in Sophie's room at 0300 hours, just watching her sleep with an expression I couldn't decipher. "You okay?" I'd asked from the doorway. He turned, and for just a moment, I'd seen something close to grief in his face. Then he'd smiled, kissed my forehead, told me to go back to bed. Just wanted to check on her. I should have pushed harder. Should have demanded answers. But we'd built our marriage on trust and operational necessity, and breaking that meant acknowledging that something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't ready to face that. Neither was he. Now, driving through the darkness with Sophie dozing in the back seat and my service weapon pressing against my side, I replayed every conversation, every evasion, every moment where I'd chosen to trust instead of interrogate. The truth was there in the pattern, clear as any intelligence assessment I'd ever written. Ethan had known something was coming, had been preparing for it, had maybe been trying to protect us from it without explaining what it was. The question was whether he was protecting us from an external threat or from himself. The safe house in Annapolis looked like every other rental property in the neighborhood, a modest 2-story colonial with white siding, black shutters, and a small front yard that needed mowing. The Bureau maintained maybe 24 properties like this scattered around the mid-Atlantic, places where protected witnesses or compromised agents could disappear for a few days or weeks while threats were assessed and neutralized. I'd only been here once before, during the initial briefing when Ethan and I had set up our contingency protocols. The keys were hidden exactly where they were supposed to be, under a fake rock by the back porch that was slightly too perfect to be real. Inside, the house had that sterile quality of a space that was cleaned regularly but never really lived in. Neutral furniture, generic artwork, nothing personal anywhere. I did a quick sweep of the rooms, checking windows and sight lines, confirming the panic button location in the master bedroom, verifying that the landline was active and the security system was functional. All of it's second nature, muscle memory from years of training. Sophie was too tired to ask many questions. I got her into pajamas, tucked her into one of the bedrooms upstairs, and told her we were having an adventure, that Daddy would call soon, that everything was fine. She believed me because she was 7 and I was her mother, and she didn't yet understand that adults lied most when they were most frightened. When her breathing had evened out into sleep, I went back downstairs and made the call I'd been avoiding. Assistant Director Jones picked up on the second ring, his voice alert despite the late hour. "Brooks, I was wondering when you'd reach out." That sentence told me everything. He'd been waiting for my call. He knew something had happened. The question was how much and whose side he was on. "Sir, I need to know what's happening with my husband." "That's not a conversation for an open line." "Then let's make it a secure one." There was a pause, the sound of him moving to somewhere more private. When he spoke again, his voice had the careful neutrality of someone navigating a minefield. "Supervisory Special Agent Brooks is currently under review by Internal Affairs." That's all I can tell you. Under review. The words that ended careers and destroyed families and meant that someone, somewhere, had decided you were a threat instead of an asset. Review for what? You know I can't discuss ongoing investigations. Sir, with respect, someone was watching my family tonight. My husband called me with an emergency extraction order. I'm sitting in a bureau safe house with my daughter wondering if we're hiding from external threats or internal ones. I think I've earned more than bureaucratic stonewalling. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear him weighing options, calculating risks. Jones had been my mentor when I'd first joined counterintelligence, had taught me half of what I knew about reading people and situations. He was also a political animal who'd survived 3 different FBI directors by never making waves and never backing the wrong horse. If Ethan was truly compromised, Jones would cut him loose without hesitation. But if there was any ambiguity, any chance this was more complicated than it appeared, he'd hedge. There are concerns, he said finally, about potential compromise in cyber operations. Multiple concerns from multiple sources. That's all I can say on an unclassified line. Compromise. Not misconduct, not incompetence, but compromise. The word we used when an agent had been turned, when foreign intelligence had gotten their hooks in deep enough to make someone work against their own country. My stomach went cold. You think he's working for someone? I think there are questions that need answers. Charlotte, listen to me. You're a good agent. You're smart, you're careful, and you're exactly the kind of person we need in this organization. Don't let your personal feelings compromise your judgment. Stay where you are. Don't make contact with your husband. Let internal affairs do their job. And if their job is wrong, then the system will correct itself. But not if you interfere. He disconnected before I could respond. I sat there in the dark living room, staring at my phone, trying to process what I'd just heard. Under review. Potential compromise. Multiple concerns from multiple sources. The language was careful, clinical, designed to communicate facts without revealing sources or methods. But the implication was clear. The Bureau thought Ethan had betrayed us. I wanted to reject it outright, to trust the man I'd built a life with, the father of my child, my partner in every sense that mattered. But I couldn't. Because the truth was, I'd seen this before. I'd investigated it, documented it, helped destroy the careers and lives of agents who'd made the same choice Ethan might have made. I knew how it happened. Financial pressure, ideological disillusionment, blackmail, ego. The motivations varied, but the pattern was always the same. Small compromises leading to larger ones, lies building on lies, until the person you'd been was buried under the weight of the person you'd become. The house was too quiet. I could hear Sophie's breathing through the ceiling, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional car passing on the street outside. Every sound felt amplified, threatening. I got up, checked the windows again, confirmed the doors were locked, pulled my weapon from its holster and set it on the coffee table where I could reach it quickly. Then I sat back down and started going through everything I knew, trying to separate fact from fear. Ethan had called me with an emergency warning. That suggested he was trying to protect us, not harm us. But from what? If he was working for foreign intelligence, warning me would be operationally stupid. It would expose his compromise, trigger bureau protocols, and whatever operation he was part of. Unless the warning itself was part of a larger play, a way to establish himself as a victim or a hero while actually serving other interests. The man watching us at the reunion could have been surveillance. Russian SVR, Chinese MSS, or any of a dozen other intelligence services that operated in the Washington area with varying degrees of sophistication. But he could also have been Bureau, Internal Affairs running their own surveillance on me to see how I'd react to Ethan's call, whether I'd follow protocols or try to protect my husband. I thought about the static on Ethan's phone calls over the past few weeks, the careful way he'd been choosing his words, the distances he'd been keeping. If he was under investigation, he would have known. Internal Affairs wasn't subtle. They wanted you to know you were being watched, wanted the pressure to make you slip, to reach out to your handlers or make some other move that would confirm their suspicions. But if he'd known he was under investigation, why warn me now? Why risk everything on a phone call that was probably monitored, that would certainly be analyzed and used against him? The only answer that made sense was that something had accelerated, some threat had become so immediate that he'd chosen to break cover rather than risk our safety. Which meant either he was truly trying to protect us from an external threat, or he was very, very good at manipulation. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, encrypted callback format. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Brooks. It's Mariah. Agent Mariah Cole, Ethan's partner. She sounded tired, strained. Are you somewhere secure? Define secure. Somewhere the Bureau doesn't have immediate access. That was answer enough. What's happening, Mariah? I can't talk long. They're monitoring everything. But you need to know Ethan's not what they're saying he is. They're building a case on him, Charlotte. They've got communications, financial records, travel that doesn't match his reports. It looks bad. But I've worked with him for 3 years, and I'm telling you, something's off about this whole thing. What kind of off? The kind where evidence appears too perfectly, where timelines line up too neatly. Someone's setting him up, and they're doing it well enough that even Internal Affairs is buying it. He asked me to tell you, don't trust the official channels. Don't assume the Bureau's on your side. And whatever happens, protect Sophie. The line went dead. I sat there holding my phone, my mind racing. Mariah was young, only 29, but she was sharp. She wouldn't risk her career to warn me unless she genuinely believed Ethan was innocent. But she could also be part of whatever operation was unfolding, another layer of deception designed to keep me confused and reactive. The problem with counterintelligence work was that you learned to see conspiracy everywhere. You couldn't just accept simple explanations because simple explanations were usually covers for complex operations. But you also couldn't assume everything was a conspiracy because paranoia made you ineffective, made you chase shadows while real threats moved freely. I needed information. Real information, not filtered through official channels or cryptic phone calls. I needed to understand what Ethan had been working on, who he'd been in contact with, what had triggered Internal Affairs to move against him. And I needed to decide whether I was going to follow Jones's order to stay put and let the system work, or whether I was going to trust my husband and start fighting back. I stayed awake until 0400 hours, sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop and a Bureau-issued encrypted drive that technically I shouldn't have had at home, but practically every agent kept for situations exactly like this. The drive contained copies of case files, communications logs, and investigative protocols that I'd accumulated over 8 years in counterintelligence. Not classified enough to be a major security violation, but sensitive enough that having them outside the office would raise questions I didn't want to answer. I started with Ethan's known cases from the past 18 months, the ones that had been briefed in general terms at division meetings or mentioned in internal newsletters. Cyber operations wasn't my specialty, but I knew enough to understand the landscape. The unit had been focused primarily on 3 major threats: Russian attempts to compromise critical infrastructure, Chinese intellectual property theft targeting defense contractors, and domestic extremist groups trying to obtain ransomware tools for attacks on government systems. Ethan had been involved in all three areas at various points, but his primary assignment for the past 6 months had been something called Operation Fracture, a joint task force with NSA and DHS investigating a series of sophisticated network intrusions into federal systems. The intrusions were notable because they showed a level of coordination and technical capability that suggested state-level resources, but the attribution was murky. Some analysts thought it was Russian. Others believed Chinese. A minority opinion held that it might be domestic actors using foreign tools and infrastructure to hide their identity. The file notes indicated that Fracture had started producing actionable intelligence around March, identifying several key nodes in the network and tracing communications back to what appeared to be a coordination cell operating somewhere in the Mid-Atlantic region. That was right around the time Ethan had started working late, taking calls in private, showing signs of stress he wouldn't discuss. I pulled up the personnel roster for Fracture. Ethan was listed as a supervisory special agent, O5 equivalent, leading a team of 4 analysts and 2 field agents. His immediate supervisor was Deputy Assistant Director Derek Holt, someone I knew by reputation but had never worked with directly. Holt had come over from domestic intelligence about 2 years ago, bringing with him a reputation as a hard charger who got results but didn't always follow protocols. The kind of person who either became a legend or a cautionary tale, depending on how his risks played out. I searched for any connection between Holt and internal affairs investigations. Nothing obvious came up, but that didn't mean much. If Holt was dirty or if someone suspected him of being dirty, the investigation would be compartmented so tightly that even my clearance level wouldn't give me access. My phone buzzed with an incoming encrypted message. No sender identification, just a string of characters that matched the format the Bureau used for high-security communications. I opened it carefully, half expecting another cryptic warning. It was a file transfer request, coming from an IP address that traced back to a Quantico server farm. The file was labeled Operation Fracture, Supplemental Evidence Review. The sender was listed as IA Oversight, which meant Internal Affairs wanted me to see something. I should have declined. Should have called Jones back, reported the contact, let the system handle it. But I opened the file instead, because I needed to know what they thought they had on Ethan. The document was a summary memo, the kind that gets prepared for senior leadership when an investigation reaches a critical juncture. It laid out a timeline of allegedly suspicious activity, encrypted communications sent from Ethan's work devices to email addresses that couldn't be clearly attributed. 3 unexplained trips to cities that happened to overlap with known Russian intelligence officer movements, financial deposits into an offshore account that had been traced back to a shell company with ties to an FSB front organization. Each piece of evidence, taken alone, could be explained away. The communications could be operational. The trips could be coincidental. The financial deposits could be someone trying to frame him. But together, they created a pattern that was hard to ignore. The memo concluded that there was probable cause to believe Supervisory Special Agent Ethan Brooks had been compromised by foreign intelligence and was actively providing classified information to hostile actors. The evidence was compelling. Too compelling. I'd built enough cases to know what real intelligence looked like versus what manufactured intelligence looked like, and this had elements of both. The financial records were particularly suspicious, not because they proved guilt, but because they were exactly the kind of evidence that would be easiest to fabricate. Create a shell company, make some transfers, ensure the paper trail leads back to your target. It would take resources and planning, but it wasn't beyond the capability of a sophisticated intelligence service or a motivated insider. I thought about what Mariah had said. Evidence that appeared too perfectly, timelines that lined up too neatly. This file read like a prosecutor's dream and a defense attorney's nightmare. It was the kind of case that would result in a quiet resignation, a revoked clearance, possibly federal charges if they decided to make an example. Ethan's career was over either way. Unless the evidence was planted. Unless someone was running a false flag operation sophisticated enough to fool internal affairs, or someone within internal affairs was actively participating in the frame-up. My mind went to the places I didn't want it to go. If someone wanted to compromise Operation Fracture, taking out the supervisory agent would be efficient. If someone wanted to distract the Bureau from a real investigation, manufacturing a fake mole case would be effective. If someone inside the Bureau wanted to eliminate a threat or settle a grudge, weaponizing internal affairs would be elegant. I needed to talk to Ethan directly. Needed to hear his side without filters or intermediaries. But every communication method I had access to was potentially monitored. Calling his phone would be logged. Emailing would leave traces. Even trying to reach him through back channels would create a pattern that internal affairs could use against both of us. Sophie appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Mommy? Why are you awake?" I closed the laptop quickly, forced to smile. "Just working, baby. Go back to bed." I had a bad dream. I got up, led her back upstairs, tucked her in again. She held onto my hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. "Is Daddy okay?" The question hit harder than I expected. I wanted to tell her yes, wanted to give her the certainty that children deserved. But I'd never lied to Sophie about the important things. "I don't know, sweet girl. But I'm going to find out. Promise?" "Promise." She fell back asleep holding my hand, trusting me to make things right because that's what mothers did. I stayed there until her breathing evened out, then went back downstairs and made a decision that probably ended my career but might save my family. I was going to find Derek Holt and ask him directly what the hell was happening with Operation Fracture. And if he wouldn't talk, I was going to break every protocol I'd ever learned and start my own investigation into who was setting up my husband and why. The sun was starting to rise over Annapolis, light spilling across the water visible from the safe house's back windows. I had maybe 6 hours before Jones would expect me to check in, before internal affairs would start wondering why I wasn't following orders, before the machinery of the investigation ground forward and made everything irreversible. I grabbed my weapon, my credentials, and the files I wasn't supposed to have. Then I wrote a quick note for Sophie, "Back soon. Stay inside, call this number if anything scary happens," and headed out into the morning. Deputy Assistant Director Derek Holt's office was on the 3rd floor of the Hoover Building, in a section reserved for senior leadership in counterterrorism and domestic intelligence operations. I shouldn't have been able to get near it without an appointment and a damn good reason, but I'd worked at the Bureau long enough to know how security worked. If you moved with purpose, carried the right credentials, and projected the authority of someone who belonged, most people wouldn't question you. The morning shift guards knew my face from previous visits. They waved me through without asking why I was there at 0700 hours, looking like I'd slept in my car. Holt's administrative assistant wasn't at her desk yet. I went past without slowing, knocked twice on his door, and walked in before he could tell me not to. He was on the phone, facing the window, his posture rigid with whatever conversation he was having. He turned when I entered, and I watched his expression shift from annoyance to calculation to something that might have been resignation. He held up one finger, "Wait," and finished his call with the kind of non-committal phrases that could mean anything or nothing. When he hung up, he didn't ask me to sit. "Special Agent Brooks." I was expecting this conversation, but not quite this early. "Then you know why I'm here. Your husband is under investigation by internal affairs. You want to know what we have, whether it's real, whether there's any possibility we're wrong." The answer is, I can't discuss ongoing investigations, especially not with the subject's spouse. I stayed standing, kept my voice level. "Sir, someone was watching my family last night. My daughter is in a Bureau safe house because my husband called with an emergency extraction order. I'm not here as a spouse. I'm here as a counterintelligence agent who needs to understand if there's an active threat to Bureau personnel or if something else is happening." Holt studied me for a long moment. He was in his mid-30s, younger than most people at his level, with the kind of face that looked harder than his age suggested. He'd built his reputation on aggressive investigations and operational successes that made the FBI look competent in an era when that was increasingly rare. He also had a reputation for protecting his people, which meant either he believed Ethan was guilty or he knew something that complicated the official narrative. "Sit," he said finally. I sat. He moved his desk, opened a drawer, pulled out a file that was notably thinner than I expected. "What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room." It's compartmented above your clearance level, and sharing it with you violates about 6 different security protocols. But your husband requested I brief you if things went sideways, and things have definitely gone sideways. That wasn't what I expected to hear. Ethan requested 4 months ago, we identified a potential security breach in cyber operations. Someone was leaking classified information about our investigation into foreign network intrusions. The leaks were sophisticated, targeted, and timed to cause maximum damage to our operations. We couldn't identify the source through normal counterintelligence methods. So we set a trap. Understanding started to dawn. You made Ethan look dirty. We created evidence suggesting he was compromised. False communications, manufactured financial records, travel patterns that would trigger internal affairs protocols. Then we watched to see who took the bait. The theory was that if we made it look like we'd identified a mole, the real mole would either try to recruit him or try to eliminate him as a threat. Either way, we'd get a lead. That's insane. You're destroying his career to catch someone else. We're protecting the mission. And for the record, your husband volunteered. He understood the risks. He also understood that if the trap worked, we'd need someone on the outside who could act independently, who wasn't bound by bureau restrictions, who would be motivated to investigate if things went wrong. That's you, Charlotte. That's why he wanted you briefed. I sat back, trying to process this. Internal Affairs thinks they're investigating a real mole. Some of them do. The investigation had to be genuine enough to be convincing. But the evidence flows through me, which means I control what they see and when they see it. So far, we've kept the operation contained. Until last night. Holt nodded. Until last night. Someone made a move on your family. That wasn't part of the plan. That suggests whoever we're trying to flush out knows more than they should, which means we have a bigger problem than we thought. Who is watching us? We don't know yet. We're pulling surveillance footage, running facial recognition, checking for vehicle registrations. But whoever it was, they were good enough to avoid our counter-surveillance, which narrows the list of possibilities. I thought about the man by the SUV, the way he disappeared so completely. This is Russian. Maybe. Or Chinese. Or domestic. That's the problem with sophisticated operations. Everyone's methods have converged. We can't attribute based on technique alone anymore. So what now? Now you do what Ethan wanted you to do. You investigate from the outside. You're not bound by bureau protocols or investigation restrictions. You can follow leads that we can't officially pursue. And if things get dangerous, you're deniable. We can claim you went rogue, that you were compromised by emotional attachment, that you're not acting under bureau authority. You want me to be bait. I want you to be an asset. There's a difference. I stood up, anger rising despite my efforts to stay professional. You're asking me to risk my career and my family so you can clean up your operation. I'm telling you the situation. What you do with that information is your choice. But Charlotte, he leaned forward, and for the first time I saw genuine concern in his face. Your husband believes in this. He thinks whoever's compromised cyber operations has access to systems that could do catastrophic damage if they're not stopped. He was willing to sacrifice everything to protect that mission. The question is whether you believe in him enough to do the same. I wanted to walk out. Wanted to take Sophie and disappear somewhere the bureau couldn't find us, where Ethan's choices didn't dictate my future. But I couldn't. Because if Holt was telling the truth, if Ethan had knowingly destroyed his reputation to protect the mission, then walking away would make that sacrifice meaningless. What do you need me to do? Holt handed me the thin file. Start with this. It's everything we know about the actual breach, communication patterns, timing, the kind of information that was leaked. There's a pattern there, but we haven't been able to crack it. Maybe you'll see something we missed. I took the file, stood to leave. At the door, I turned back. If this goes wrong, if my daughter gets hurt because of your operation, then I'll deserve whatever you do to me. But right now, the best way to protect your daughter is to finish what your husband started. I left the Hoover building the same way I'd entered, moving with purpose, showing credentials, acting like I belonged. But inside, I was running the calculations that every intelligence officer learned to run. Probability of success. Potential costs. The line between heroic sacrifice and catastrophic failure. Ethan had chosen this. had walked into a false flag operation knowing it could destroy everything we'd built. The question was whether he'd done it because he truly believed it was necessary, or because he'd been manipulated by people who were better at running operations than we were. Either way, I was committed now. For better or worse, I was part of whatever game was being played. And I had about 6 hours before Jones would notice I wasn't where I was supposed to be, and the whole thing would get even more complicated. I got back in my car and started reading the file Holt had given me, looking for the pattern that would either clear my husband's name or confirm that everything I'd believed about him was a lie. The pattern emerged on my third pass through the documents, subtle enough that I almost missed it, but clear once I saw it. The leaked information wasn't random. It followed a specific cadence tied to operational calendar events, quarterly briefings, budget reviews, personnel rotation schedules. Whoever was providing intelligence to foreign actors knew exactly when critical decisions were being made and what information would be most valuable at those moments. That suggested someone with access to senior leadership calendars and operational planning. Not just a field agent or analyst, but someone embedded in the administrative or executive structure. The list of people with that kind of access was relatively short, but it included dozens of career bureau personnel who'd spent decades building their reputations and clearances. I was sitting in my car outside a coffee shop in Arlington, working through scenarios, when my phone rang with a restricted number. I answered carefully. "Brooks. It's Jones." His voice was tight with controlled anger. "Where are you?" "Following up on some leads." "That's not what I ordered you to do. I told you to stay at the safe house and let internal affairs work." "With respect, sir, I don't trust internal affairs to work fast enough. Someone was watching my family. I need to understand why." There was a long pause. When Jones spoke again, his voice had shifted into the careful neutrality that meant he was choosing his words for an audience. "Special Agent Brooks, I'm ordering you to return to the designated location immediately and await further instructions. Failure to comply will result in administrative action. Do you understand?" The phrasing told me everything. He wasn't alone. Someone was listening to this conversation, probably someone from internal affairs or maybe even senior leadership. He couldn't tell me what he actually thought, couldn't acknowledge that I might be right to investigate. All he could do was create an official record of ordering me to stand down. "I understand, sir." "Good. I'll expect confirmation of your compliance within the hour." He disconnected. I sat there looking at my phone, knowing I had maybe 45 minutes before noncompliance became a formal problem. I could go back to the safe house, wait for the official investigation to unfold, trust that the system would eventually reach the right conclusion. Or I could keep pushing, knowing that every minute I stayed in motion was another minute closer to either breakthrough or disaster. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. Encrypted attachment. Password is Sophie's birthday backwards." I pulled up my personal email on my phone, found a message from an address I didn't recognize with an encrypted file attached. I ran it through my decryption app using Sophie's birthday reversed, 7/15/2018, and waited while my phone processed the file. It opened into a series of screenshots and documents that looked like they'd been pulled from Bureau internal systems. Surveillance logs. Communication intercepts. Financial records. All of it related to Deputy Assistant Director Derek Holt. The implications hit me like cold water. Travel records showing Holt making unexplained trips to Moscow and Beijing over the past 3 years. Bank records indicating offshore accounts that didn't appear on his financial disclosure forms. Communications suggesting contact with known intelligence officers from Russian SVR and Chinese MISs. If this evidence was real, Holt was exactly what Internal Affairs thought Ethan was, a compromised agent working for foreign intelligence. And I just sat in his office, taken his file, agreed to investigate based on his direction. But the evidence could also be manufactured. Someone could be framing Holt the same way Holt claimed to be framing Ethan. The question was who and why, and whether any of this was actually real or just layers of deception designed to keep everyone confused and reactive. I called the number that had sent me the text. It rang twice before someone answered, a woman's voice I didn't immediately recognize. "You got the file?" she asked. "Who is this?" "Agent Mariah Cole." I'm using a burner because everything else is compromised. Did you look at the documents? I looked. This implicates Holt. Because Holt is the real target. Think about it, Charlotte. Ethan gets flagged as a mole, Internal Affairs investigates, all attention goes to him while Holt continues operating. It's classic misdirection. Make the investigation so focused on one person that nobody looks at the person running the investigation. That doesn't explain why Holt told me Ethan was part of a false flag operation. Mariah's voice sharpened. He told you what? I summarized the conversation, watching her silence stretch as she processed. Finally, she spoke again, and now she sounded uncertain. That's either the truth or an incredibly sophisticated lie. Charlotte, I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is that Ethan asked me to protect you and Sophie if things went wrong, and things have definitely gone wrong. Where's Ethan now? I don't know. He went dark yesterday afternoon. His phone's off, his apartment's empty, his service vehicle is parked at Quantico, but nobody's seen him. Internal Affairs is treating it as evidence of guilt, that he ran when he realized the investigation was closing in. But it could also mean he's in danger. Or it could mean he was exactly what the evidence suggested, a compromised agent who'd realized his cover was blown and was now running to whatever handler he'd been working for. I didn't say that to Mariah, but the possibility sat heavy in my mind. What do you need from me? I asked. I need you to trust your instincts. You've worked counterintelligence longer than I have. Look at the evidence, all of it, from every source, and tell me what you see. Because right now, I can build a case for 3 different scenarios, and they all end with someone I care about either dead or in prison. She disconnected before I could respond. I sat in my car looking at 2 different files, Holt's and the one Mariah had sent, trying to find the thread that would unravel the truth from the deception. The coffee shop door opened and a man walked out carrying 2 cups. He crossed the parking lot in my direction, and I had my hand on my weapon before I consciously registered him as a threat. He stopped a few feet from my car, holding up both cups in a gesture that was either peaceful or mocking. "Special Agent Brooks," he said through my closed window. "My name is Mikhail Petrov. I work for Russian intelligence. And I think you and I need to have a conversation about your husband." I didn't open the door. "You have 30 seconds to explain why I shouldn't call this in right now." Petrov smiled, seemingly unbothered by the weapon I knew he could see in my hand. He was maybe 40, dressed in business casual, with the kind of face that could be Russian or American or anything in between. "Because if you call it in, your husband dies. And because I'm the only person in this situation who's being honest with you. Russian intelligence officers don't do honest." "True. But we do transactional. And right now I have information you need, and you have leverage I want. So we can either stand here making ideological pronouncements, or we can talk like professionals." I weighed the options quickly. Calling for backup would trigger a whole cascade of official responses that would almost certainly end with me detained and Petrov disappeared. Not calling for backup meant operating completely outside Bureau authority, probably ending my career, potentially walking into a trap. But Petrov was right about one thing: if he'd wanted to hurt me, there were easier ways than a parking lot conversation in broad daylight. "Put the coffee down and step back." He complied, moving slowly and deliberately. I got out of the car, weapon held low but ready, and did a quick visual sweep for backup or surveillance. If he had a team, they were good enough that I couldn't spot them. "Talk. Your husband is not compromised by Russian intelligence. Neither is Deputy Assistant Director Holt. The evidence suggesting either of them are moles was created by a third party, someone who wanted to fracture the Bureau's cyber operations capability and create enough internal suspicion to paralyze your investigation into actual network intrusions. Why should I believe you? Because we've been tracking the same intrusions you have, and they're not ours. Someone is conducting sophisticated network operations against both American and Russian government systems, using techniques and infrastructure that don't match known actors. We initially assumed it was Chinese. They assumed it was us. Your bureau assumed it was someone. But the reality is that it's a fourth party, and that party benefits from all of us fighting each other instead of investigating them. I kept my weapon steady. That's a convenient narrative. It's also true. Your husband figured it out about 6 months ago. He approached Holt with his theory. They decided to run a false flag operation to draw out the real actors. What they didn't anticipate was that those actors were sophisticated enough to turn the false flag against them. Now the Bureau thinks Ethan is a mole. Ethan thinks Holt might be a mole. Holt doesn't know who to trust, and meanwhile the actual compromise continues. And you're telling me this out of the goodness of your heart? I'm telling you this because it's in Russian interests to stop these intrusions. We don't like unknown actors operating on our systems any more than you do. And we've concluded that the fastest way to identify and neutralize them is to help you fix your internal mess so we can work the actual problem. It was plausible. Disturbingly plausible. The kind of convoluted intelligence operation that made sense once you understood all the pieces, but looked completely insane from the outside. Who's the fourth party? We don't know yet. That's what we need your help determining. But we have evidence suggesting they're based domestically, operating with significant resources, and connected to someone with access to both Russian and American intelligence architecture. That's a short list of possibilities: contractors who work both sides, former intelligence personnel with retained access, certain technology companies with government relationships. You're describing half of Northern Virginia. Yes. Which is why we need your counterintelligence expertise to narrow the list. Charlotte, may I call you Charlotte? You're in a unique position. You have bureau access, personal motivation, and the benefit of being officially off the reservation. You can investigate leads that neither your internal affairs nor my service can pursue without triggering counterintelligence alerts. Help us identify the real actors, and we'll help you clear your husband's name. And if I say no? Petrov shrugged. Then we all keep stumbling around in the dark while someone else controls the game. Your husband stays under investigation. The actual breach continues. People on both sides die because intelligence gets compromised. It's not a good outcome for anyone. I lowered my weapon slightly, not because I trusted him, but because standing in a parking lot pointing a gun at a Russian intelligence officer was eventually going to attract attention. What evidence do you have? He pulled a thumb drive from his pocket, held it up. Metadata analysis of the leaked communications. Network traffic patterns showing the timing and routing of the actual intrusions. Correlation with events that benefited neither Russian nor American interests. It's all on here. Look at it, run your own analysis, and tell me if you reach a different conclusion. I took the drive carefully, checking it for anything obviously dangerous. This could be poisoned. It could be, but it's not. Because if I wanted to compromise you, there are much easier methods than an elaborate parking lot meet. Charlotte, I'm being honest with you because I need you functional and investigating. A compromised or dead FBI agent doesn't help anyone. Except the people trying to fracture the Bureau. Exactly. Which is why you should consider that everyone telling you to stand down, to trust the system, to let internal affairs handle this, they might be genuinely trying to protect you, or they might be working for the people who benefit from keeping you passive and confused. He stepped back toward his car, leaving the coffee cups on the hood of mine. I'll contact you again in 48 hours. If you've made progress, we'll share more intelligence. If you haven't, we'll both keep stumbling around until something breaks badly. Good luck, Special Agent Brooks. For what it's worth, I hope your husband is as honest as you believe he is. He drove away in a nondescript sedan that was probably rented under a false identity. I stood there for a full minute, processing what had just happened, before getting back in my car and staring at the thumb drive like it might explode. Every instinct said don't trust Russian intelligence. But every instinct also said something was deeply wrong with the official narrative, and Petrov's version at least explained why nothing made sense. I plugged the drive into my laptop using an isolated virtual machine that would prevent any malware from spreading to my main systems. The files opened clean, no obvious Trojans or tracking software, just raw data and analysis documents. I started reading, and the more I read, the more the pattern became clear. Petrov was right. The intrusions showed characteristics that didn't match known actors. The timing suggested someone with insider knowledge of both Bureau and Russian intelligence operations. And the ultimate beneficiary wasn't Moscow or Beijing or any foreign power, it was whoever was systematically weakening both sides while operating in the chaos they created. My phone rang again. Jones, probably calling to see why I hadn't confirmed compliance with his order. I let it go to voicemail, made a decision that probably ended my career but might save my husband, and started building a target list of people and organizations who fit Petrov's profile. Somewhere in this mess was the truth. Somewhere was the person or organization sophisticated enough to run this kind of operation. And somewhere, hopefully, was Ethan either hiding from threats or running toward them, either innocent or guilty, either the man I thought I married or someone I'd never actually known. The only way to find out was to keep pushing forward, past official channels and bureaucratic caution, and every warning that said stop investigating and trust the system. I had maybe 24 hours before the Bureau officially declared me rogue. I intended to make them count. I stood at my sister's backyard in Silver Spring that August evening, watching Sophie chase fireflies while family voices mixed with barbecue smoke. It should have felt like home, but my instincts were screaming that something was off. Ethan hadn't been home in 3 weeks. Supervisory Special Agent Ethan Brooks, my husband of 9 years, embedded so deep in a cyber operations assignment that even his phone calls came through with suspicious digital delays. I'd worked counterintelligence long enough to know when someone was feeding me a line, even when that someone was my husband. My phone buzzed. Northern Virginia area code. I moved to the quiet corner of the yard. Brooks. Charlotte. Ethan's voice, but wrong. Cold. Tactical. Who's there with you? Everyone. Why? The pause was too long. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Listen to me. Take our daughter and walk away. Now. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. Ethan, don't argue. Don't explain. Take Sophie and drive to the secondary location. Do you remember where that is? The secondary location. A safe house near Annapolis we'd established 3 years ago during a particularly nasty case. I remember. Good. I'll make contact when it's secure. Charlotte, his voice cracked slightly. I'm sorry. The line went dead. I moved on training, not panic. Scooped up Sophie, made casual goodbyes, walked to the car at exactly the speed limit. Halfway there, a car alarm blared. The black SUV 3 houses down had its lights flashing. Standing next to it, looking directly at me, was a man I'd never seen before. Tall, maybe 40, wearing clothes too tactical to be civilian. His posture was wrong, too still, too focused. That wasn't curiosity. That was target acquisition. I didn't run. I buckled Sophie in, checked my mirrors, pulled out at the speed limit. But my hands were shaking, and in my rearview mirror, the man had disappeared. Gone, like he'd never been there at all. The safe house in Annapolis looked like every other Bureau property, modest, anonymous, maintained but never lived in. I got Sophie settled, told her we were having an adventure, promised Daddy would call soon. When she was asleep, I called Assistant Director Jones, my old mentor. He picked up on the second ring. Brooks. I was wondering when you'd reach out. He'd been waiting. He knew something had happened. Sir, I need to know what's happening with my husband. That's not a conversation for an open line. We moved to secure channels. His voice took on careful neutrality. Supervisory Special Agent Brooks is currently under review by Internal Affairs. That's all I can tell you. Under review. The words that ended careers and destroyed families. Review for what? You know I can't discuss ongoing investigations. Sir, someone was watching my family tonight. My husband called with an emergency extraction order. I think I've earned more than bureaucratic stonewalling. Long pause. There are concerns about potential compromise in cyber operations. Multiple concerns from multiple sources. Charlotte, stay where you are. Don't make contact with your husband. Let Internal Affairs do their job. And if their job is wrong, then the system will correct itself. But not if you interfere. He disconnected. I sat in the dark, trying to process it. The Bureau thought Ethan had betrayed us. They had evidence, communications, financial records, travel patterns. It looked convincing. Too convincing. I'd built enough cases to know what manufactured intelligence looked like, and this had elements of both real and fabricated evidence. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check your email. Encrypted attachment. Password is Sophie's birthday backwards. I opened the file. Screenshots and documents from Bureau internal systems. All related to Deputy Assistant Director Derek Holt, Ethan's supervisor. Travel records showing unexplained trips to Moscow and Beijing. Bank records indicating offshore accounts. Communications suggesting contact with known foreign intelligence officers. If this evidence was real, Holt was exactly what Internal Affairs thought Ethan was, a compromised agent. But the evidence could also be planted. Someone could be framing Holt the same way they were framing Ethan. The number that sent the text rang when I called back. "You got the file?" Agent Mariah Cole, Ethan's partner. This implicates Holt. Because Holt is the real target. Make the investigation focus on one person while nobody looks at the person running it. Charlotte, I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is that Ethan asked me to protect you and Sophie if things went wrong. Where's Ethan now? I don't know. He went dark yesterday afternoon. Internal Affairs is treating it as evidence of guilt that he ran when he realized the investigation was closing in. After she disconnected, I made a decision that probably ended my career but might save my family. I was going to find Derek Holt and ask him directly what was happening. I got into the Hoover building early, moving with purpose, projecting authority. The guards knew my face. They waved me through. Holt's assistant wasn't at her desk yet. I walked into his office before he could tell me not to. He was on the phone, turned when I entered. He held up one finger, wait, and finished his call. When he hung up, he didn't ask me to sit. Special Agent Brooks. I was expecting this conversation, but not quite this early. Then you know why I'm here. Your husband is under investigation. You want to know if it's real. The answer is, I can't discuss ongoing investigations, especially not with the subject's spouse. Sir, someone was watching my family last night. I need to understand if there's an active threat or if something else is happening. He studied me for a long moment. Finally, sit. What he told me changed everything. For months ago, they'd identified a potential security breach in cyber operations. Someone was leaking classified information. They couldn't identify the source through normal methods. So they set a trap. They made Ethan look dirty. Created false evidence suggesting he was compromised. Then watched to see who took the bait. You made Ethan look dirty, I said slowly. We created evidence suggesting he was compromised. Your husband volunteered. He understood the risks. He also understood that if things went wrong, we'd need someone on the outside who could act independently. That's you, Charlotte. That's why he wanted you briefed. Internal Affairs thinks they're investigating a real mole. Some of them do. The investigation had to be genuine to be convincing. But the evidence flows through me, which means I control what they see. Until last night. Holt nodded. Someone made a move on your family. That wasn't part of the plan. That suggests whoever we're trying to flush out knows more than they should. He handed me a file. This is everything we know about the actual breach. There's a pattern there, but we haven't been able to crack it. Maybe you'll see something we missed. I took the file, understanding what was being asked. I was being made into an asset, operating outside official channels, deniable if things went wrong. What do you need me to do? Start with this. If we're right, your husband believes whoever's compromised cyber operations has access to systems that could do catastrophic damage. He was willing to sacrifice everything to protect that mission. The question is whether you believe in him enough to do the same. I spent hours in an abandoned surveillance post in Tyson's Corner, cross-referencing data from multiple sources. 3 hours in, I found it. A technology contractor called Sentinel Solutions, security clearances with both DoD and FBI, specializing in cybersecurity architecture. On paper, legitimate. In practice, perfectly positioned to access both the systems being targeted and the investigations protecting them. The CEO was a former NSA analyst named Marcus Garvey who'd left government service under unclear circumstances. His company had grown rapidly, securing contracts suspiciously well-timed with emerging threats. Looking at his financial records, travel patterns, business relationships, there were anomalies everywhere. If I was right, Garvey had built a business model around creating the very problems he was paid to solve. My phone buzzed. You're getting close. They know. Move now. Before I could respond, the building's security system beeped. Derek Holt came through the door with his weapon drawn. When he saw me, he didn't lower it immediately. "Charlotte, I was hoping I wouldn't find you here." I told him what I'd found. His expression shifted, not surprise, but confirmation. "We reached the same conclusion about 6 hours ago. We're executing a raid on Sentinel's offices in 30 minutes. You can either come with us officially, or you can stay here and wait for the after-action report." "I'm coming." The raid went textbook for 90 seconds. Then we reached Sentinel's main office suite and found it empty. Abandoned. The only thing left was a laptop in the center of the conference room, screen glowing with a video file labeled for SSA Brooks. I clicked play. Marcus Garvey appeared on screen, younger than expected, with casual confidence. "Special Agent Brooks. If you're watching this, congratulations, you figured it out faster than I expected. But I'm afraid you've arrived too late. By the time your tactical team breached this office, I was already on a flight to somewhere without extradition treaties." He paused. "You're probably wondering why I'm telling you this. Simple professional courtesy. You won. You identified the threat, unraveled the deception, proved your husband's innocence. The fact that I'm still free doesn't diminish them. Tell Ethan he played the game well. He almost had me." The video ended. We'd found the truth, but the actual threat had escaped. My phone buzzed. "Roof. Come alone." Ethan was standing at the edge of the roof when I found him. "You listened," he said finally. "You left me no choice." I stood next to him. Holt briefed me. "I know about the false flag, about why you did it." "Do you?" He looked at me with doubt. "I destroyed my career, Charlotte. Put our family at risk. All to catch someone who got away anyway. You identified the threat. Proved the Bureau wasn't compromised. Cleared your name. That's not nothing. It's not enough." He turned back to the skyline. "I'm suspended pending review. Best case, I get reassigned. Worst case, forced retirement. Either way, I'm done with cyber operations. What about us?" "I don't know. Quiet. Honest. I made decisions without consulting you. Put Sophie in danger. I don't know if you can trust me after that." I thought about the evidence, the pattern that emerged, the proof he'd been trying to protect us even when it looked like betrayal. "You were doing your job. That's not good enough. Doing my job doesn't excuse putting my family at risk." We stood in silence. Finally, he spoke again. "Maybe this job isn't compatible with having a family. Maybe we've been lying to ourselves. So what do? We rebuild. Slowly. Carefully. Less as husband and wife, more as two agents who survived the same war. We figure out if there's still something worth saving." It wasn't romantic, but it was honest. 6 months later, I testified before an oversight committee. Ethan had been reassigned to Quantico, training recruits. We were working on our marriage slowly, dinner twice a week, separate living situations, trying to rebuild trust. I'd been promoted to GS-14, leading a new counterintelligence unit. Garvey remained at large. The testimony lasted 3 hours. When it was over, Assistant Director Jones was waiting by my car. "You're doing good work, Charlotte. Don't let the cynicism overwhelm that." My phone buzzed, a text from Ethan asking about dinner with Sophie. I texted back yes, got in my car, and drove toward whatever we were building together. It wasn't the marriage we'd started with or the career either of us had planned. But it was honest work done by honest people trying to protect something larger than themselves. 8 months after that, Rachel Kim from the National Counterintelligence and Security Center came to my office about Garvey. They'd tracked someone operating as Michael Graves in Singapore, running a company similar to Sentinel. They wanted my help. I met Ethan for lunch to discuss it. "You want to do it," he said. "I think I need to. For closure. This is about whether you're willing to risk everything we've been rebuilding to chase someone halfway around the world." We compromised. I'd consult analytically, but not operationally. No more secrets. That evening, I picked Sophie up and we went to the park. She chased fireflies like she had at the reunion almost a year ago, asking hard questions about why Mommy and Daddy lived separately. I gave honest answers, that we were working on it, that love wasn't always simple, but was always worth fighting for. My phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "Dinner at my place tomorrow?" We can talk about Singapore or Sophie's science fair or anything except work. I texted back, sounds perfect. In this line of work, you learned that loyalty wasn't declared, it was proved when everything collapsed. Trust wasn't about never being hurt, but about deciding someone was worth the risk. Family wasn't defined by perfect circumstances, but by the choice to keep showing up. I'd learned those lessons the hard way. But watching my daughter chase light through the darkness, I thought maybe it was worth it. Maybe the messy, complicated, imperfect life we were building was exactly what we needed. Not a story of triumph or tragedy, but of ordinary people doing difficult work and trying their best to protect what mattered most. Sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing, always learning, always trying again. That was enough. It had to be. That's where I had to choose. Trust the system or trust my instincts. If you were in my shoes, what's your first move? Do you call it in or grab your kid and go? What red flag would have tipped you off sooner? And how do you explain a safe house to a 7-year-old? Drop your answers in the comments, I read them. If this hit home, tap like, subscribe for more boundary-setting true stories, and share this with someone who needs a plan before the phone ever rings.